start doing what we do here. All right. All right. Well, thank you, folk, for coming out tonight. This is a collaborative webinar on how to speak with Ohio legislators and know that you are being heard in some way, shape, or form. I am Joan VanBecelaere, and I'm Executive Director of Unitarian Universalist Justice Ohio. And we have two other presenters. Larry, if you introduce yourself.
I'm Larry Bresler. I'm Director of Organize Ohio.
And Teresa's on the phone. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Teresa Mills. I'm the Executive Director of the Buckeye Environmental Network here in Columbus.
And I am very grateful for these folk that are joining us because they've got tons of experience in dealing with this strange little animal that is the Ohio legislature. We're going to be passing this ball back and forth among the three of us. So if we pass the ball wrong at some point, please forgive us. But we're doing a shared webinar here. Just to give some little bit of background as we move into this. You all should know that 20% of bills introduced into the legislature are passed in a session. But there are some that just don't have that much of a chance. Those are the expensive bills, of course. Those that involve major changes in infrastructure or the way we do things, and those that deal with unpopular issues, although sometimes unpopular issues do pass, as we've seen with the recent passage of the bills around reproductive rights. Lobbying. This is another one of those terms we should know. The IRS definition of lobbying is an attempt to influence legislation at the local, state, national level, city council. You can lobby city council. And contrary to what a lot of the congregations I work with think, lobbying by nonprofits and congregations is legal. But partisan support, as in supporting candidate A instead of candidate B, or very, very partisan work here rather than partisan work there, now that is illegal. There are also two types of lobbying that we deal with. There's the grassroots, which is trying to influence the legislators by communication with the general public, and then the general public puts pressure on the legislators. And then there's direct lobbying, which is lobbying directly with the legislators. Larry, did you have anything to add to that?
No, only that that nonprofits can and really should be doing legislative lobbying, and as long as it's nonpartisan, then it's not a problem unless they spend some very high percentage of their budget on lobbying, in which case then they have to fill out an additional IRS form.
Right. Right. The IRS says substantial amount of time and resources without defining substantial. So you just kind of watch it. Okay. One of the chief things about talking with legislators in person or testifying or whatever the heck you're doing is to know the process. Know the dates of important things happening like hearings or the votes that are coming up. Follow the process online. It's pretty easy. We'll show you. Know at which points you can make some impact, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And then look for changes and amendments in the bills so you're not stuck protesting or supporting something that got changed 2 days ago, which is a little embarrassing. So in other words, do your homework. And part of doing the homework too is knowing your issue, knowing, not just the surface issues, but really know where it impacts people. You might identify some poor people and others that can lead a lobby effort if you're working with an organization, which folk feel comfortable going in and talking or testifying or chatting with legislators, and which feel comfortable doing other things. It always helps if you're trying to bring in some new legislation or get some ideas across, is to locate a lawmaker who is sympathetic with that issue and will advance your cause. This is if you're trying to get something new put into the legislature. Understand the formal structure and procedures. I think I've said that already. And then have a point person spend as much time as possible at the site, at the State House, so that they know where things are, so that they know who's who. They know where even knowing where the elevators are can really help a lot. But that way you don't walk into a hearing and you stumble, or walk in to do testimony and wind up stumbling around not knowing where anything is. So if you're working with an organization, have somebody that knows the lay of the land. Okay? These are real basic things. Now we're going to get into some more specific stuff. And that is advocacy activities. Now, when you're contacting a lawmaker, what is going to work? A lot of that depends on what your objective is. Now, if you're looking to get new legislation introduced, or you have an idea for an amendment to some existing bill, you want to have some personal, face-to-face contact with a lawmaker or with their staff folk. If you want to make a specific point about pending legislation, you should testify in committee. If you want to register support or opposition for a bill and have a bunch of other people do that with you, then you call a legislator's office. And then to ask a question, you can send an email or leave a message, and you'll most likely get a good response rather quickly. So let me go through really quickly a rundown of some of the popular forms of communication and some thoughts on these. It's on the slide here. Postcards and traditional petitions. We have all seen those, right? So during a legislative session, they tend to typically lie in a pile until a staffer or an intern has a chance to review and put them into a spreadsheet of some form. And that can take weeks or even longer. So it really is not a good way to have any impact on fast-moving legislation. If you want more of an impact, consider taking a stack of petitions or handwritten notes to the lawmaker's office in person. Mass emails, including those that are generated by online petitions, and we've all seen hundreds of those. The staffers of the legislators treat identical messages really as spam, and they often respond with some spam canned response that they'll send out to you, a little form letter. Anything where you simply fill out your name and a few other pieces of information online with no other personalization isn't all that effective anymore. Using this route, it's a lot better if you try to rewrite any provided text and personalize your message. Next on the list of increasing impact is personal letters. Now, these work sometimes. A non-form letter can work, but not all the time. Your chances are probably around 50-50 of getting a personalized letter back as opposed to some kind of form letter. However, by the time the office gets the letter, the bill may have changed or passed on to another committee. So this approach of a personal letter would be best used if you were trying to raise a new issue or start a conversation with your legislator about a bill that you would like to see introduced in the future, or an issue that you think they should take up in the future. Although frankly, even then, a face-to-face meeting is going to be more effective even than a personal letter here. And then there's phone calls. If you can't meet face-to-face, but you want to influence a lawmaker's vote, you likely, give a call. You'll likely talk to a staffer. You may leave a voicemail, but your message will be heard and tracked along with other calls. Now, if you can arrange it, having multiple folk call a member's office on the same issue, even better on the same day if you can make a real impact, if you do it in bulk. So if possible, they say here in Ohio, it's best to call on a Monday or a Friday between 9 and 4 when the legislators' offices are less busy. You tell the staffer your name, that you're a constituent, because they may ask easily for your address, and what you're calling about. Now, you got to be concise. You want to use your own words. This is where the elevator speech thing comes in that Larry's going to talk to you about too. Tell them how you'd like the member to vote. Or if you want, ask how the lawmaker is planning to vote. You can ask them to consider a particular factor in their decision. You want to be polite. And the last thing you need is for a staffer to start recognizing your phone number as something that's trouble, or problematic and start screening your calls. So at the end, you thank the staffer, and if you want a follow-up, you got to be sure to ask for it. If you get a lawmaker's voicemail now, feel free to leave a message and even ask for a callback. You'll more than likely get one. I know I've gotten several. And sometimes you even get a personal callback from the representative or the Ohio State Senator. When to email? Yeah.
I just wanted to emphasize that a substantial volume of phone calls can have a real impact. So if you can try to get, organize 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, that can be very impactful.
Yes, and we've had cases where an entire congregation has taken it on as one of their projects to have people call on a particular piece of legislation. And that can be real impactful. So yeah, organize there too. And then when to email instead, because the lawmakers have their email forms and their email addresses out there in public. If you need a lawmaker to send you a document, like maybe testimony they've given at a hearing or agendas for a committee they chair, or to answer a question about some legislation that they're sponsoring, those are the type of specific things that are often better responded to via email. Or if you're just kind of shy and hate phones, my spouse hates phones, and you want to ask your lawmaker to vote a certain way, a quick email can work. But make sure to include your home address so they know you're a constituent. And then there's social media. Some, not all, of our state lawmakers are active on Twitter or Facebook. Take a look at the legislators' social media. And if they seem to be interacting with people who reach out to them, then you are in good shape. In that case, hit them up with a simple, non-confrontational request or question. Remember, if you're rude or aggressive, especially on Facebook or Twitter, it kind of magnifies, and then you may not get any response at all. And then later on, I'm going to talk about testimony before committee and in-person meetings. And this is my favorite little cartoon here. It's a bill starting its way through the maze and then finishing as a law. Yes, it is a convoluted little system, and Teresa is going to talk to us about that. Teresa?
Okay. I'm going to start out by talking about tracking a bill. To find out what the bill does and where it is in the process. I would suggest that everybody go to the Legislators website, which is, you can see www.legislature.ohio.org. There's two other ones. There's one that's for the House, which is www.ohiohouse.gov. And the same with the Senate, but it's ohiosenate.gov. Those are very important emails that you should always have. Okay, search by a bill. You can go by the sponsor's name, or you can go by the bill number. If you can't find the bill number, call the sponsor and ask them what the number is. If a bill that you oppose hasn't been introduced yet, focus on something else, but keep in mind that it's never too early to start giving your legislator your opinion. It may not kick in yet, but they always say that a legislator starts paying attention on the 15th call. So remember that. Try to get at least 14 other people to call the same day. In When we were working on injection wells, we had these little silicone bracelets that had the governor's phone number on it. And so every Wednesday at a certain time, we would start calling the governor's office. So you don't have to wear the little bracelets, but if you could, arrange like a group of you for just to have a good time. Let's make this fun. Let's all do this at the same time. Like you call it this time, I'll call it this time. And, let's do it that way. Let's have some fun with this. If a bill you support hasn't been introduced, call the legislature that you think may be interested in the issue and ask for a meeting. They might be willing to even introduce the legislation. Think about who would be a champion for your cause and go after that legislator. Don't try to go after someone is not going to be sympathetic to what you're wanting. Track a bill in committee. You can sign up for committee notices by contacting the chair of the committee. You can send them an email or you can pick up the phone and call them. Tell them that you want to be on the notification list. And then every week, either late Thursday or Friday, typically I always get them on Fridays, you'll get notice of any hearing schedules for the following week, and we'll get early notice that your bill is moving. So instead of waiting until Monday or Tuesday and then finding out the bill is going to move on Wednesday, you will get advance notice, like I said, on the previous Friday. On the committee website, you can also see a calendar of past and future hearings and download copies of testimony from other witnesses. This can be very helpful if you've never testified before, or if you're a little timid, or you don't have time to really research in depth an issue. Feel free to go back and look at some of the previous testimonies, and that could help you form your own testimony. Check the weekly committee schedule on the House or the Senate website. That's very important. I learned all of this the hard way. It's just by trial and error. I know that Joan and Larry both send out notifications on the different bills that some of you are tracking. I do the same thing for some of the environmental bills, like the anti-protest bill. If you would like to testify, the committee chair, when they send you the notice that they're going to be taking testimony, they will send instructions. And those instructions will let you know that you have to submit your testimony 24 hours in advance of the hearing. So they don't give you a lot of time, and that's sometimes why it's necessary to go back and read what others have said, because it can be very fast moving. If your bill is flagged for a possible vote, which at the end of the notice it'll say PV, possible vote, contact your member if they are on the committee and remind them how you would like them to vote. To find out how the committee members voted, check back after the hearing, and the status will say as passed or reported by the committee. And then there's a vote tab that you'll see how many voted for, how many voted against, and who they were. Let's see, once a bill is out of committee, I always encourage people to talk to the committee members, but don't forget your own legislator if they're not part of that committee, because sometimes by the time it passes out of committee and gets to the full House or full Senate floor, we have little to no time to try to educate our legislators. So pay attention, go to the committee, testify before the committee, but don't forget to contact your own legislators. Sometimes if a committee passes a bill out of committee, it can go to the floor the exact same day. So if you haven't had the opportunity to educate the full House or the full Senate, then you have no time. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Watch the calendars for the upcoming House or Senate sessions. You can actually click on the calendar and it will bring you up to the agenda. To get alerts via email, sign up with the clerk's office for email notification of rules. The Rules and Regulations Committee is the one that sets the schedule. You can also track bills by the number or committee, or you can go to, and Joan, I know Joan doesn't have this on the slides, but it's www.legislature.ohio.gov/my-ohio/track/legislation. I'm sure, Joan, you will put this on the slide before you pass it out. Read the rules report to see which bills have been scheduled for 4 votes. Once you see your bill, start making phone calls if you want your lawmakers to know how you expect them to vote. And I underline the word expect. Be polite, but let them know that you expect them to vote your way. Maybe they will, maybe they won't, but it can be, dealing with the legislature can be trying, but it's our job to do that. People have told me many, many times that, they took away our voice. Well, nobody took away our voice. We gave it away when citizens stopped going to the State House, to our house. That is our house. And we stopped attending our House committee meetings. So I invite you, please, come back to our house. Let your voice be heard. That's it.
Okay. I'm going to try and share here what the website looks like at legislature.ohio.gov. And this is the kind of thing that tracks a bill. And I just brought up Senate Bill 33. And there's summary, there's various documents. Can you all see this, Larry? Okay.
Yes.
And then, of course, there's a tab for the status and how it's going with the dates here. And then there's, of course, the votes out of Senate on this particular bill. No votes on the House yet.
Right.
And then committee activity, which is looking at the Senate's Judiciary Committee work on this. And it had a number of witnesses, the witnesses and their testimony. As you can see, there's a lot of witnesses on this one.
Right.
Even more. I'm just scrolling through them right now so you can see what it looks like. But this is kind of the main website where you're able to track the various bills. And there's House directory, Senate directory, leadership, district maps, schedules of sessions, various committee schedules up there as well. So it's a real handy one to have bookmarked for you.
Right, and if you can find the part of that page that says My Ohio Legislature, you can actually fill out a page that tells the clerk exactly what you want to be notified of. You want to be notified of committees and how they're moving, and they will send you emails and say, this is moving, and you can actually track by the legislator, by the bill number, or you can track by the subject. I do both. So.
And remember your password, which I just didn't do, so I couldn't sign in. Sorry about that.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
But that's a real key place to have your, have your account up, set up My Legislation, track your bills that way, and then it just shows you a plethora of information.
Yes. Yeah, it's great.
Okay, great. Next one, of course, I have another little cartoon here. Teresa, what did you think of this cartoon?
I thought it was cute. I don't know that we have anything funded by a joint committee, but which is, and understood. I like the one that says as understood by the public. I mean, that should be a big question mark, but it's cute.
It gives you some ideas of the fact that if you guys feel confused occasionally as you work with this stuff, don't feel bad about it, because this cartoon comes from the Michigan trial lawyers. And I first got a hold of it when I was working with master's and doctoral students in public administration and teaching economics there. And the fact that this rang so true for anybody that works in public administration or policy analysis or any of those related areas should tell you that don't feel bad if you feel confused.
If you're confused, you're in good company.
You're in very good company with people that have degrees in this stuff.
Right.
This little picture here is just another one showing you about a Senate committee hearing, so you can get some idea of what it looks like, you know, how many people there are. I've got several pictures like that in the rest of the slide deck. Because we're going to turn now and talk about committee testimony. Anything to add, Teresa or Larry, before I move on to this?
Nope,
okay.
I'm fine.
Okay, something that not a lot of folk realize is that the Ohio House and the Senate offer folk the opportunity to testify about bills under consideration. And this call for public testimony gives both advocates and activists, both proponents and opponents, an opportunity to speak directly to the lawmakers who have to vote on whether this proposal is going to be advancing through or not. According to the Ohio Resistance Guide, which has done their homework, short of meeting with each committee member individually, testifying on a bill is the most effective way to influence these people who will be deciding whether to advance a piece of legislation. Now, if you attend a committee hearing, typically, I've seen this time and again, the witnesses offering testimony are a bunch of, pardon me, lobbyists and business groups. I have never seen so many three-piece suits in my life. You know, and I'm in there in my little clerical collar. I stand out like a sore thumb. But that's true. That's, professionals come to these, but ordinary folk can come to them, because the opportunity to testify is not frequently used by the general public, but it can be, easily can be. And it's the general public folk who are most impacted by the legislation. And the reason that they don't testify is those confusing procedures and hard to find information that we've been talking about. So, who can testify? Well, someone who can give personal experience is great. Influential people, highly regarded people, great. But best of all, interested citizens can testify, and that's you and me. We can bring some statistics, we can bring scenarios, and we want to bring personal stories. So all of these are allowable as we testify. It's not like you have to stand up there like a lawyer and cite various elements out of the Ohio Constitution. You can bring your personal story of impact and how this legislation is going to engage with your community. You should come up with your testimony in writing. The couple times I've seen people try to wing it without written testimony have not been pretty. If you're able to relate the testimony to the committee members and what you know about them because you did your homework, you're ahead of the game. And then there's also the idea of bringing friends, neighbors, supporters along to pack a committee room, an obviously packed committee room. For example, when mothers demand action for gun safety, want to have people testifying on things like background bill, you will see seat after seat of all of these folk in the red Mothers Demand Action t-shirts. You saw the same thing with Planned Parenthood when people were offering testimony around the 6-week abortion ban. So they really, brought out to the fact that there were a lot of folk behind them and supporting, even though that might be only a few people that had the time to testify. Okay.
Can I just?
Actually, yeah, Larry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think one of the things that can be most impactful is people having a good personal story to say.
Mm-hmm.
Legislators' eyes glass over is one person after another gives statistics and scenarios.
Yeah.
But if you tell a really good personal story that relates to what you're talking about, that can be the legislators listen, and it can have a real impact.
I can tell you that I think it did have one of the testimonies that I gave around the 6-week abortion ban was about a friend of mine in high school back in 1972, pre-Roe v. Wade. And I could see that the legislators were very interested in what I had to say. They didn't change their votes, but you never know. You never know what impact it might have. Okay. So you notify the office of the chair of the committee, and that you can find on that wonderful website we showed you, at least 24 hours in advance. To find out when committee hearings are scheduled for your bill, you search once again online at www.legislature.ohio.gov. And you provide that office with an electronic copy of your written testimony and a completed little form called a witness slip. It's very simple to fill out. Now, you don't have to read your written testimony word for word when you get up there. You can provide additional details in your written testimony and then only present the most compelling parts, the story parts maybe, as you stand up there and speak. You do need to keep it short. Some of the chairs say no more than 3 minutes, so you have to be prepared for that. You contact the office of the committee chair, or you read the instructions provided in the emailed committee meeting notice that you've already signed up for the exact requirements, whether it's 3 minute, 5 minute, etc. Now, if your senator or representative from your district is on the committee in question, call them. Let them know that you're going to be coming and you're a constituent. Now, at the hearing, when you arrive, you can check in with the committee chair staffer. They're usually very prominent. Make sure you're on the witness list. They didn't skip you. They'll add you if they inadvertently skipped you. But if you spoke to them on the phone or you received an email to confirm that they received your written testimony prior to the hearing, you can skip this step. Some of them are really good about sending you an email. You often won't know when you'll be called to testify. Sometimes they'll tell you you're 4th on the list, but there's many bills ahead of you. So you got to be prepared to wait. And sometimes you do wait for some hours while other bills and witnesses are called. Patience is a virtue when testifying. So when they get to your bill and your name is called, you walk up to the podium, you start reading your testimony. Testimony is typically delivered while standing, but if you have some physical limitations that require you to sit, you just let the staffer know in advance. They'll set you up with a table and a chair. When I had knee surgery, they did that for me. Main thing here at this point then is to take a deep breath, try to be relaxed, not nervous, because if you're nervous, you read too fast. The members will have a copy of your testimony already electronically. They all have their little iPads. And they might be reading along, so don't worry too much if they're looking down, because they might be reading along. Okay, how do you start this? It has a certain ritual to it. So you customarily start your testimony by addressing the chair and the ranking member, essentially the designated leader of the minority party. You'll find their names on the committee pages, on the House and Senate websites of the committee, on that www.legislature, et cetera, et cetera. So you start off with, Chairman Smith and Ranking Member Jones. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on House Bill 1. And my name is Joan Johnson, And then I give a little bit about who I am, say who you are, why you're interested in the legislation. And then you can tell a story about yourself, or about someone you know, or about your community, or sometimes draw on your area of expertise. Now, although you can include additional information in your written submission to help influence the lawmaker, and how they think about the bill, make sure that the part of your testimony that you read can be read in about 3 minutes and is succinct and personal as possible. And you do want to limit it in time because there are a whole lot of folk that want to witness usually, and the chair will limit that time, and you don't want to be cut off. Now, if you cannot attend the committee in person, you can still submit written testimony. And that written testimony is also sent to the members. It's posted online. It becomes part of the committee record for all of this. And while it's not as impactful as being there in person and having them see you face to face and seeing into your eyes as you're telling your story, it's certainly more effective than an email. And it counts towards the big balance of all of those who are in support or opposed to the particular bill. Now, when you're done, the chair will ask if members have questions for you. If they don't, thank them for their time, sit down, you're done. If there are questions, it's customary to respond to the person asking the question through the chair. I never get this right. It seems weird, but here's how it works in practice, okay? Representative Jones asks you a question, and you answer, Chairman Smith, to Representative Jones, the answer is ABC XYZ. Or Chairman Smith, I want to reply to Representative Jones that the answer is ABC. Don't worry if you forget, because I keep forgetting. Just be polite and respectful, even if the question is totally dumb. Okay? If you don't understand what they're asking, restate it so that into what you think they are asking, and they'll correct you. Or ask the questioner through the chair to rephrase it. And if you don't know the answer, that's okay, because you are not expected to be an expert on anything and everything other than your own experience and your own story. So feel free to remind them of that. But if you have more information at home, or you're willing to do the research, or your organization has additional information that you didn't have with you, you can offer in your response to follow up with some more information after the hearing. So, next, in-person meetings. An in-person meeting is actually the most effective way to get a lawmaker interested in your issue, particularly if it's not getting any attention at the moment, okay? You may be able to meet with a legislator in Columbus, but if you can't make that schedule work, then getting a meeting with their staff can also be effective. At the meeting, if you have a personal story about how a law is currently not working the way it should, you tell it. You can bring some other people with you if you can. If you're alone, you can indicate if you're speaking on behalf of a group or an organization. But always connect your issue to the lawmaker's area of interest. And if you're not sure about this, visit the legislators page on the Ohio House or Senate website and see what they're talking about in their own press releases or even what they have sponsored in the past. You can expect to get about 15 to 20 minutes of their time if you're lucky, but make sure that you can say what you got to say in less than 5 minutes if that's all you get. Before you go, make a very specific, actionable request. You can ask them to introduce a new bill or an amendment to an existing bill. Or you can ask them, do you think you will now vote for ABC, XYZ in a certain way? You always leave your contact information. And if you have any relevant articles or examples of similar legislation in other states, maybe a little packet of information, And then you follow up in a couple of weeks. If you've stumbled upon some new information after your meeting, you can follow that and forward it along. Okay. Now, instead of meeting in Columbus, as I said, when meetings, and in Columbus, meetings may be short because they're trying to accommodate the unpredictability of the sessions and the hearings, you can try meeting with your legislator in your district or in their home office. Members can often announce their office hours when constituents can drop by without an appointment to discuss items and issues. You can like or follow the members' social media pages and hear about these kinds of opportunities. Or you can call their office and ask them, when are there going to be office hours? And if you can't arrange a person-to-person meeting with the legislator, then you could ask even for a conference call. A conference call is better than a meeting with an aide, and having your message relayed, secondhand through an assistant. Either before you meet with the legislator or afterwards, arrange to get your written materials to the person through email or delivery through an aide. Okay. And my slides were out of order, and I do apologize for that. Okay. So this is a couple more pictures of what's taking place in the House, in the Senate, what it looks like in the hallways. And now I'm going to turn it over to Larry.
I'm going to talk a little bit about elevator speeches. Elevator speeches, they're called elevator speeches because we're trying to grab a legislator as they're going from one place to another, and sometimes that's actually in elevators. So if we're having trouble establishing a sit-down in-person meeting with a legislator, we can, as I say, we can try to catch a legislator in hallways. In Columbus, it's much easier, but the opportunities are much better for senators sometimes than they are for House members, because with House members, with the senators, we can catch them when they're leaving their offices in the Senate, or where they're coming out of their committee rooms, meetings, or whatever in the Senate. With the House, it's more difficult because we can't usually do that in the Reich building where the House members are, because now they've locked it up so people can't get up there. They've made it tougher than Fort Knox up there. But that doesn't mean we can't do it. So I think the first thing you need to do when we're talking about elevator speeches and trying to get to a legislator, and usually when we're trying to get to a legislator to do an elevator speech, it's where there's a hot topic that's going to be voted on pretty soon, either in committee or on the floor, and we're trying to get their attention right now on that. And so you need to know who you want to speak with, or if you want to speak to anybody you can find, that's okay too, but you need to be able to recognize the legislator themselves. So if you're not able to identify a legislator, if you don't know exactly what that person looks like, go on the legislative website that Teresa talked about earlier, and all their pictures are there. And make a copy of them and take them with you and identify the legislators so that you can go talk to them. My experience is I generally try not to grab legislators' attentions if they're about to go into committee or they're about to go into session. I try not, in all cases, not to do it as they're going in, because you're going to have almost no time to talk to them. It's much easier, it's much more likely to have more of a conversation with them if they're coming out of session or they're coming out of a committee. And I just find that it tends to become more amenable. Next slide. So when you do an elevator speech, and again, this is going to be very short. Sometimes you get with some luck, you might get a few minutes, maybe even 5-10 minutes. Most of the time, it's going to be fairly brief. So you want to establish yourself very, very quickly. So in one sentence, you're going to want to establish your credibility. So it might be, hello, Senator Dolan. My name is Jane Doe, and I live in Mayfield Heights, and I'm one of your constituents. Or hello, Senator Dolan. My name is Jane Doe. I'm a member of West Shore. I'm a member of West Shore Unitarian Church, and I'd like to speak to you about whatever you want to do it. Or I'm somebody, or about somebody else. Hello, Senator Dolan. My name is Jane Doe, and I'm a Medicaid expansion recipient from Cleveland. I want to talk to you about Medicaid, about Medicaid expansion work requirements, something in that regard. So make it very, very quick. Then immediately you want to explain. You want to explain why you're talking to them. That Senate Bill 13 is going to be voted on soon by your committee. Is going to be voted in your committee. That I would like to talk to you briefly about voting against, the importance of voting against Senate Bill 13, or that I want to talk to you the importance of keeping full Medicaid expansion, or whatever you want to talk to him or her about. And so I say you want to make that very quick. You want to do it in a sentence or two. And then the likelihood is that person is going to be walking from one place to another. And again, if you're catching them coming out of session, the probability is that they're going to be walking back to their offices. And so hopefully you can continue walking with them as they're talking. In many cases, they'll allow you to do that. So you briefly want to give them your talking points, to give facts, an example, and if you have a time, a very short personal story. And hopefully ones that appeals to the senator. So if Medicaid expansion has been for a healthier workforce in Ohio, you're from a rural district. It's been a boon to the rural hospitals in your district. And it's so important for not only for people who are in Medicaid expansion, but for the medical providers in your area. And then hopefully you can have a brief discussion with that person and be able to do that. You can go ahead and move forward. And then try ending with a commitment appeal. Can we count on your support for whatever? Or if and the alternative, would it be possible? We've been to talk to you very briefly. Can we set a time to be able to talk to you further about this? And then move forward with that. You want to provide the information to your legislator, send the person information later, hopefully leave information at the office for the person, and then follow it up with a letter thanking them for talking with you, recapping the discussion, and then again appealing for their support. For many people, they kind of find doing elevator speeches a little intimidating. They don't have to be, and as you begin doing them, you develop some comfort level with them. Although some people can clearly be better at them than others. With an organization that I work with called Northern Ohioans for Budget Legislation Equality, we had a staff person a few years ago who was absolutely and I was in awe of how well he did. At one time, he saw Josh Mandel when he was the state treasurer, had an issue with him we had never seen before, starts talking to him, and Josh Mandel gets in the conversation with him to the extent, and it goes on to such a degree that Josh Mandel invites him in his car to continue talking with him. He's driving off. So some people can just really become adept, but the more you do it, the more comfortable you become and the more effective you can become. And it can be an effective way of reaching legislators, particularly when we don't want to really be talking with aides, and it gives us a chance to talk to them, and it also gives us a chance to talk to legislators as they're about to deal with important legislation. So it's something that we don't do enough of, but can be very effective.
And Larry, I was going to say, the outline that you have for the elevator speech is also a great outline to start with when you're going to go in for a face-to-face meeting.
Yes.
because you don't know how much time you're going to have. So if you can do it with your kind of outline, you can always expand.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
This is Teresa. Can I just add one thing in here?
Sure.
I found it very, well, kind of easy to get through to your House members. There is a tunnel between the basement of the State House and the Rice Center that almost all of the House of Representatives use going to and from the State House. So if it's before committee, I try not to do it before committee, but if it's before committee, I go to the entrance in the Rice Center to the tunnel, and then that way I can walk clear across the tunnel, which goes under Broad Street with the representatives. And then the other way around, if it's after the meeting, go down, the elevator speech is going toward the parking garage. And then that's in the way back to their office in the Rice Center. So just thought I would add that.
That's good. Know where to catch them.
Right. Know where to catch them.
So a few words on communicating.
So we've been talking about everything in terms of what we want to say, and talking about the whole processes and whatnot, and just kind of finishing up a little bit in terms of ways, some brief things we want to think about as we're communicating our messages to try to convince a legislator or anybody for that matter in terms of changing their minds or getting support in terms of what we're doing. And so as we begin, I think we need to be thinking in terms of from a perspective of frames or frames of reference. And by that we mean everybody has operates with frames, which is kind of the mental structure of beliefs and values and knowledge that we all use to see the world. And what our interest is doing is we're trying to get legislators to vote in the way we want to do. In many cases, we're trying to reframe. We're trying to kind of challenge the beliefs, the knowledge that they already have, to alter their way of seeing the world, and at least in a very small way, to support us in the legislation that we're trying to get passed or defeated. So, as you say, there's the frames in which you all operate, and then we're trying to reframe. So as we're talking about reframing, trying to get people to be on our side, I think there's some kind of basic assumptions. The first is that people are not blank slates. Everybody has their set of frames, and we have to recognize those going in. And if we've done our research, hopefully we have some idea of some of that when we're going in. Secondly, the communications is interactive. That we don't want to just talk to people. We don't want to just talk to the legislators. We want to hear back with them. And as we're going to try to reframe, try to help them to reframe, we've got to have some kind of two-way communication. Thirdly, the communication resonates with people's deeply held values and worldviews, which I'm going to get to more in a second. That the currency of communications is frames, as we talked about, and communication is ineffective if people have to fall back in their existing frames. So if we've reinforced where people were at to begin with, then we haven't done our job. But if we're effective, people can look at our issues potentially from a different frame. So let me give you a brief example of that. Some years ago, back in the 90s and the 2000s, there were all these maximum minimum sentences that were being passed across the country, including Ohio, usually for low grade drug offenses. And the idea was that if we if we pass these kinds of laws that for low that it would send a dire warning for those who would sell drugs, and it would serve as a deterrent, and that we could stop drug trafficking. So what happened instead was that that we filled up our prisons with these people, and drug trafficking went on as it ever was. So eventually, people started to work to reframe. So we're filling up all these prisons with low-level drug trafficking. Meanwhile, people are getting out much quicker who have been convicted of assaults and robberies and all kinds of things. Does this make sense? And look what we're paying for all these people in prisons. And we were able to reframe. And we were able to reframe the arguments. We were able to reframe the communication in that regards. And now there's a much different way of looking at that. So, a brief example of framing and reframing. Go ahead and move to the next one. So as we're trying to appeal to people, there's kind of three levels of understanding, three levels of kind of values that we're talking about doing that. Level one is the big ideas, the big values that everybody can agree to. Things like freedom, things like justice, things like of success, things like responsibility, safety would be another one. I mean, a whole host of them that everybody can agree to that are important to all of us and that we want to do. And that's kind of level one. Level two are kind of basic issue types. A belief in healthcare, belief in a good environment, a belief that we shouldn't have poverty, belief that everybody should have quality education. And level three is kind of levels of understanding in terms of specific issues. The Affordable Care Act, welfare reform, SB 13 for or against, whatever. And as we're trying to get people to change, as we're trying to get people to change, we want to be appealing to the level one or level two values. So we may be coming in around SB 13. Or we may be coming in around trying to deal with the problems of the opioid epidemic, in terms of trying to get funding for kinship care parents that are being where it's being put into them. But if we're trying to communicate our message and trying to get support, we don't want to necessarily focus, or we can focus. We don't want to give all of our focus in terms of that level three. We want to particularly focus then in terms of level one and level two. So if we're trying to get support for funding for kinship care parents, or the opportunity for them to be able to provide, they can put their children in childcare or whatever. Then we can appeal from a perspective. It's going to be their responsibility, and we appreciate their responsibility, but we got to give them support so they're able to assume the responsibility. Or if we're talking about SB 13, we want to talk about the idea that everybody has a basic freedom of speech, rather than talking about the intricacies of SB 13, and appeal to the big values and speak from the perspective of big values, and in that way, in ways that everybody can agree with, and then just finding ways that we can bring people in under those circumstances. So by appealing to higher level values to reframe, particularly in terms of level one, we can move people more towards consideration of our solutions. And it gives us an opportunity because we're working on the same plane.
Great.
You can move on to the next one. Again, we want to use values to set up what is at stake and why it matters. And we don't want to merely drop a value. We don't want to merely say that SB 13 is important for basis of freedom of speech. We want to really talk in detail of why it's so critical, and why it's so critical that we all believe in that. And so not just in terms as it applies to an individual, how important it is societally. So going back to SB 13 as an example, we don't want to talk about the idea that that people are that this is going to be so horrible for these individual groups if they do it, or it can happen to an individual who does this or an individual who does that. But what does this do societally to us if people cannot feel free to do basic kind of protest or for the most part even lawful protest or what they think is lawful protest when they could be going to prison for 3 years? Something in that regards. But however we do it, we want to express our values in very reasonable and explanatory tones. If we become preachy, we're going to lose people. We want to do it in a way that as we're talking to legislators, whether particularly individually, although also from testimony, in a way that we're in all this together. And that us working together, we can deal with things, but not in any kind of a preachy way. And I think that's something that we tend to fall into frequently. We got to get out of. So as we're giving testimonies or we're speaking to people, we want to use numbers sparingly. We all like to throw out these horrible statistics or horrible numbers, and they're worthwhile. But the more times we do it, people's eyes glaze over. And so if we fill up our arguments with one number after another, people forget them. And also if we don't want to make it sound like the numbers are so big and so scary that it's going to be incomprehensible for us to do it. So, for example, if we're trying to get funds for inner cities for education in Ohio schools, and we say part of the reason we need is because we have 65% of the inner city schools across Ohio are not graduating. That suggests that no matter how much money we put into it, it's not going to make an impact. So we need to be discreet in terms of how we put our numbers in. At the same time, as we're putting in numbers, we want to talk about it from a perspective, if not just to establish the size of the problem, but talking about that if we don't do it, what's going to happen if we ignore the problem. As we've been dealing with the opioid crisis in Ohio, and everybody recognizes that's a big issue. But there's got to be people that are available, the kinship care parents who are available. And so if we don't provide support for kinship, we're finding that 100,000 kinship care parents are going to be needed. I'm just throwing that number out to do this. But the idea is if we don't provide support for those people, they're not going to be able to do it. So the idea that we have to provide support, and the cost of ignoring it is going to make things that much worse. So we need to use numbers to underscore the capacity for success. Last thing I want to talk about, when we're talking to legislators, we need to use an effective tone. We need to do it in a way that that's a real communication that's relating to people. So extreme statements, partisan attacks will turn supporters off, will turn legislators off, and do little to increase our support. So there was one person during the SB
33,
SB 13 thing that came in and was and among other things attacked the former governor. Wasn't going to be real helpful in terms of getting SB 13 passed. Advocates also lose credibility when they talk in highly partisan terms. And that's a real challenge, particularly as we're doing with SB 13, because it's it's such a part. It's become such a partisan issue. So we have to think about ways and again, to a substantial degree, talking about appealing to those higher values that we all agree that it doesn't become partisan. And I, on a personal level, if I'm testifying or I'm talking to a legislator, I never even use the word advocate. I may say that I'm speaking on behalf, but if I say I'm advocating, all of a sudden that becomes polarizing, because that suggests there's one side and then there's the other, and I'm speaking for one side, and we can't come together. I think it's important that we establish a very reasonable tone, a very calm tone, that we set up a problem solving that we can do, that can do kind of thing, that engages who we're talking with, and that we can solve this thing working together. And again, finally, it's so important that where we can, we want to use one of those strong level 1 values to provide universal agreement in terms of things that we can move forward on, even if we seem to be on different sides as we're coming in. So that's my very brief discussion in terms of communication.
Okay, thank you. All right, as we wind up here, we want to have a little opportunity. We've already been given some stories. As Teresa and Larry have been talking, they've been given some stories. And the picture up on the screen right now shows you what I was talking about in terms of packing the hearing room. And that is Mothers Demand Action and Everytown USA sitting there in their red shirts, indeed, right up front by the legislators as they hear testimony. But Larry's talking about tone and all gave me a reminder about a couple things I've seen. And I don't want to belabor this, but there's a couple things I've seen that people have done in testimony that have been particularly notable. One is don't insult the legislators. We've said that, Larry says a reasonable tone, but don't insult them. Because even if they're off base and highly partisan, they're still trying to serve us, in one way or another. And performance. I have seen people that have brought testimony that was really a performance. One woman gave an astounding epic poem, but it was a performance, not a persuasion, and it did not persuade at all. So, bless her soul for the creativity, but the legislators were kind of off-put. And something that I've also seen is where people get off topic and they start talking about something that's very near and dear to their heart, but has nothing whatsoever to do with the bill at hand. And in one case, the chair had to stop the poor guy and say, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about Senate Bill 33, right? So, stay on topic, right? This is why you write the stuff out and you don't wing it. And you don't assume that the people in front of you oppose or support your views as a committee or as a group. I saw one where the person giving testimony kept repeating, well, you guys are going to vote against, you're going to vote this in anyway. So why am I here? Well, why are you here? And she just assumed that they were going to vote in the negative, all over and over and over and over again. You cannot assume that, because if you're effective in reframing the values, you might actually persuade them to change something. So never, ever, ever discount the fact that miracles do happen and grace does abound, and we can change people's minds. So, those are just some things that I've seen in testimony that I wanted to share with you. Teresa, do you have something?
Yeah, I just have a couple of things. Joan, when you were just talking about the person that kept saying, we know you're going to vote this, for this or against this anyway, that is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Yep. And we have no room in what we are doing for self-fulfilling prophecies.
Right.
And so don't do that. Don't do that. And there's one thing I want to caution everyone on. I always, yes, it can be very boring. And I know the legislators have my testimony. I try to stick with my written testimony because I want everything that I have to say to be on the record. And if you get up before the legislators and you have not submitted something in your testimony, then it's like it never happened because it will never show up on the legislators' webpage. So please think about your testimony. Please try to have everything you want to say, even your personal stories, down in writing so we can make sure that what you have to say is recorded in history.
Right.
Because that's very important. Because if we ever have to, file a First Amendment lawsuit, we need everything in writing. So that would be my word of caution. Yes, I've seen a lot of people say some amazing things, but, the legislators don't hear it, and it's not recorded for history. So please, that's kind of all I've got. But it can be. For years, I stopped going to the State House, and it was just like, oh my God, what is happening to the State House? And it was just like, well, this is partially my fault because I stopped going to the legislature and I stopped giving testimony. So, I took a little bit of that blame for myself, and now I've changed that. So I've been going. I've had some health issues, so I haven't been able to get the last 2 hearings, but I will be back, and I will let them hear my voice. My voice will ring loud and clear in a calm manner, that they will know that I was there.
That's great. Okay. Any other stories that you want to share, Larry, or should we get some quick questions here because we're kind of running on the time here?
Yeah, I would go to questions.
I'll go to questions.
Yeah.
So if you want to unmute yourself or type something in the chat box, I know we've kind of deluged you with stuff here, guys, but that's why we'll also have the slides available in the recording. Any immediate questions? No questions. Great info.
There is one here.
Okay.
Oh, no, it isn't.
Are you all going to go out now and be willing to testify?
Well, I think Joan is going to add our contact information. So if you're kind of shy and don't want to ask a question right now, please feel free to contact any of us, and we can answer your questions and even help you with your testimony if you need to.
Yes, we can. And I just put the slide up with our contact information on there, as well as the Ohio Resistance Guide for Ohio Activists, which is a fabulous resource that outlines this stuff too. And then a bibliography that Larry had from Frameworks Institute, which is also excellent around the framing issues.
Right.
So this is all good resources for you to use. And that Ohio Resistance Guide is a step-by-step guide.
Right.
Okay, so
I've used that for a long time. Well, not a long time, ever since it was in existence.
Ever since they put it out there.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
So are there any other questions or comments?
I don't have any. This has been great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And we will be putting this on the UJO Facebook page with video and linked for the slides as well.
Awesome.
Then I'm going to thank everybody. I'm going to stop the recording.